So today I'm going to start by talking to you about the more broader concept of passion. This is something that our culture talks about extensively. We are constantly referencing passion in some form or another. It's a very acceptable topic to discuss. So for example, the famous astronomer Galileo tells us that passion is the genesis of genius. The legendary British Prime Minister, two-time, Benjamin Disraeli says that man is only great when he acts from passion. And the legendary business leader, Steve Jobs, says that people with passion can change the world for the better. Now, these are short, brief, to-the-point statements. If we want something a little bit long-winded, we go to an artist. This is my favorite. Passion, it lies in all of us, sleeping, waiting. And though unwanted, unbidden, it will stir, open its jaws and howl. It speaks to us, guides us. Passion rules us all, and we obey. What other choice do we have? Passion is the source of our finest moments. The joy of love, the clarity of hatred, the ecstasy of grief. It hurts sometimes more than we can bear. If we could live without passion, maybe we'd know some kind of peace, but we would be hollow, empty rooms, shuttered and dank. Without passion, we'd be truly dead. This is from Joss Whedon's Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But it offers us something that we can talk about, at least a couple times. So our artists, our business leaders, our scientists, and virtually anybody in any field you can think of really likes to talk to us about passion. Again, it comes up again and again and again, meaning seemingly different things. But we don't actually know what it is. In fact, we have a really poor understanding of passion as a concept, even as we recognize how fundamental it is to our lives and how central to many of our human experiences. This is what the Oxford English Dictionary gives us. Passion, a strong and barely controllable emotion. And that's it. Now we have a ton of different emotions. Most of them at some point or other are strong, and many of them are downright uncontrollable in the right circumstances or situation. So you can see how the dictionary definition, again, doesn't give us a lot to work with. Now we can, again, go do something that a lot of English majors like to do, which is go back and see what Shakespeare does. And Shakespeare's theory on passion is actually really inconsistent with what we might think. We might think of the bard as constantly talking about passion as this beautiful, wonderful, transcendent force. But no. Shakespeare often, if not consistently, uses passion to describe a state of intoxication where you lose rationality. He sees it as kind of a bad thing, not unlike inebriation. So once again, we're kind of left in the dark a little bit. Beyond that, not just in terms of what field we're talking about with passion, but in terms of what passion can actually be. We see it come up in discussions of violence, the passionate soldier. We see it come up in discussions of romance, a passionate love. And we see it come up frequently in discussions of creativity, the idea of, I guess, inspiration, the passionate artist consumed by their mission. So what if all of these passions, to some degree, were essentially the same thing? That the passion of the warrior is the same as the passion of the lover, is the same as the passion of the artist inspired. This is the suggestion that the book I want to talk to you about today evokes. Lost Girls by Alan Moore and Melinda Gebbie, suggesting that passion is passion is passion. All that matters is how we choose to express it, but all essentially the same. Now, for me personally, as mentioned in the introduction, I came to the University of Waterloo 13 years ago to become an expert in American poetry. When I got here, I very quickly learned that my voice was being lost in a sea of voices that valued things that I did not value. It wasn't the right field for me. Completely despondent, I went home one Thanksgiving to figure out what to do with maybe not even just my career, but my life. And I found my old comic book collection. And I rifled through it, and I wondered if there might be something in there to be inspired about. I pursued that. Eventually, it brought me to the famous comics as literature movement, which is still ongoing, showing me great works of art, like Art Spiegelman's Mouse, Craig Thompson's Blankets, Mariana Satrapi's Persepolis, and eventually, Lost Girls, by Alan Moore and Melinda Gebbie, which I came to not out of genuine interest, but I literally got assigned to do a review of it. And as a result of that, I was a little bit shocked by the material, and frankly, even a little bit offended. But the book as a whole forced me to ask questions that I was uncomfortable with, questions that on a day-to-day basis I didn't want to ask. I didn't even want to think about. And as such, I think that actually is what makes it a great work of literature. Its capacity to challenge me outside of my usual comfort zone. So, as I said, Lost Girls made me uncomfortable, but also kind of inspired. Now, the writer of Lost Girls, and I use that term a little bit loosely because the way it was composed is different from how most comics are composed, is Alan Moore. Alan Moore is probably the most famous comics author alive, very well known, and has had tremendous success in spite of the fact that he refuses to leave the small town in northern England where he resides. He's most famous for some of the creations that you see here, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and Batman, The Killing Joke. Melinda Gebbie, his partner on this project, is best known as a feminist comics artist associated with the Women's Comics Collective, someone who brings comics into a very sort of political arena in a direct fashion. Now, as I said, normally when we think about illustrator and writer in comics, we're talking about a situation where they don't even have to be in the same room. In some cases, they don't have to be in the same continent. But Moore and Gebbie didn't want to work that way. So what they did was they formed a stronger collaboration where they would be together, where the writer would help inform the art and the artist would help inform the script. Back and forth until everybody was happy with it. They worked on this project for 16 years before it eventually reached fruition and was published. So imagine a hotel resort in Austria, roughly a century ago. 3 women come together there and almost immediately begin a passionate affair. One that is sexual, yes, but also spiritual and deeply, deeply creative. Unbeknownst to these women, Franz Ferdinand is about to be assassinated right around the corner. And thus their affair begins just as World War I is about to take place. These characters are not chosen at random. They're not created whole cloth. They are familiar to the average reader. Moore chooses as his 3 protagonists Wendy from Peter Pan, Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, now all grown up. These characters come together and, as I said, try to figure out sort of what their individual sexual histories have meant to them as individuals, how it has informed their personalities, their character, the meaning of their lives. To give you specific examples, Dorothy's story is a story of 3 passionate affairs, each with a farmhand. The first farmhand has no courage. The second farmhand has no emotion, no heart. And the last farmhand is essentially got no brain, can't hold a conversation with her. Now, obviously, we're referencing the original Wizard of Oz here in terms of the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and the Scarecrow. Alice, meanwhile, Alice in Wonderland, we know as a story of a young girl who is taken down a rabbit hole to a world of madness. In this particular case, the white rabbit isn't a literal rabbit, it's a pedophile who takes her into a world of actual madness through a series of sexual abuse. Meanwhile, the Neverland that Peter Pan takes Wendy to isn't a second star to the right, as we're familiar with from that original story. It's actually a meadow in a public park where a bunch of younger people get together to have a series of sexual interactions. And through that, she's able to explore her sexuality a little bit. I would say what we're talking about here is kind of slash fiction, to use a contemporary term. But imagine that only like literary slash fiction. That's what Moore and Gebbie are setting up. So as I'm making clear here, the specific passion that Alan Moore and Melinda Gebbie are working with is lust, physical passion. Of course, that is only their touchstone. That is their foundation upon which they build their larger, I would say more insightful argument. Moore specifically suggested that what he and Gebbie were trying to create was a new form of pornography, one that is non-exploitative and emotionally resonant, something that we tend to not see in our current culture. Here's his overview of his mission. We're working for hopefully something human and timeless, like I think our sexual imagination has proved to be thus far. It's been with us since the Venus of Willendorf, and will certainly be with us until we've managed to eradicate ourselves from this planet. We wanted to speak to that quality, that timeless, eternal human interest in sex. So human sexual imagination, definitely one of the main things that Lost Girls is trying to take up, suggesting that that imagination is, as noted here, constant, eternal, but in our culture, not commonly discussed. As much as we love to talk about passion, sexual passion is often a taboo or forbidden topic. And for Moore and Gebbie, that is itself kind of a tragedy, because there's value in discussing these things. In terms of what human sexual imagination does for us in our actual sex lives, the obvious. We have things as complicated as role play or as simple as generating arousal. Even simpler than that, we have masturbatory fantasy and the role that sexual imagination can play in that. In fact, there's a colloquial term for the sexual imagination with regard to masturbatory fantasy, and it's called spank bank. Bank being the operative term here. This is something with value, something with currency. So is this all that Lost Girls is? Is it a discussion about how pornography can help our sex lives? No, not at all. That's just the starting point. Moore and Gebbie quickly go a step further, suggesting that when we fail to articulate our sex lives and the role of sexual imagination within our physical passions, we fail to articulate the way that our sex lives, our sexual imagination, and our sexual passion interact with a number of other pretty important things to how we live our lives. That we fail to articulate our violent urges, or our love, or our creativity. But when we allow ourselves to talk about these things, then suddenly we start to see the interconnectedness that lies within. Rivers, essentially, if you will, all running from the same source, just in different directions. The plot makes this very, very clear. As mentioned, Alice shows up at the hotel. She begins a passionate affair with Dorothy. Wendy, driven by essentially curiosity, soon joins them. Their sexual encounters take place over many different interactions. And what they do, the pattern that they sort of fall into, is two of the characters will actually be having physical sex with each other, and the third will be telling them a story about their individual sexual history. That story will arouse the passion of the other two further. So thus, they're actually kind of creating pornography within their sexual acts themselves. Quickly, though, we see how this escalates way beyond just working with their sex lives. Again, it's not just physical passion they're achieving, it's actually emotional intimacy. Because they're not just sharing random sex stories that they make up in order to inspire each other's passion. There's no fiction. This is reality. What they're doing is disclosing important moments from their history. Thus, this is a very intimate interaction that we're receiving. And this really sort of becomes full circle when during one of the sexual interactions, Alice says this: "We're all coming together." This is achieved at a moment of simultaneous orgasm, but of course it's meant to refer to so much more than that. That what they are achieving through this personal disclosure is something, again, much more spiritual, something much more profound. They're sharing this hidden history, all these things they're not allowed to talk about with each other. And as a result of that, they are coming together in, again, kind of a profound and significant way. Here's Alan Moore on the subject of sexual potency. "I think if you were to sever that connection between arousal and shame, you might actually come up with something liberating and socially useful." So sex in Lost Girls is not just universally a good thing. Moore and Gebbie's message isn't sex is good. It's not sex is bad either. It's neither of those things. Sex is powerful. Sex can be channeled in a lot of different directions. Sexual passion can lead you to joy or atrocity, to destruction or healing, depending upon how it's done. The sort of pivot point in terms of deciding whether you've got the good thing or the bad thing seems to be in Lost Girls when the women are free to explore their sexuality without shame or fear of violence. When they do that, they find healing. They come to terms with who they are. They come to terms with their sexual past. When they don't have those things in place, sex can be dangerous and damaging. And again, neither good nor bad. The overall point that Moore is working with is that, again, this is something that our culture represses. These discussions are not being allowed to happen. And again, whether we look at sex as good or bad, that's not productive. The climax of the novel is, I would say, pretty appropriately, an orgy. A hotel-wide orgy featuring at least dozens of people. A little bit hard to keep track of. But then after that, the text ends on a very, very tragic note. The characters learn that the soldiers are coming. World War I is breaking out. And this sexual escape and this intimate personal disclosure and this safe space that they have found with each other is going away. So they say their goodbyes, they express some optimism for their futures, and they get out of the hotel. Shortly thereafter, the German soldiers arrive, and they burn it to the ground. Now, the last 2 pages show a battlefield. That's what the hotel is now. It's just an empty field where people are killing each other. What we get is a picture of a soldier in close-up. All we can see is his face, with this look of bliss on it. Frankly, it looks like orgasmic bliss, which we have been conditioned to see throughout the earlier many chapters of the novel. But then we pan back a little bit further, and we see it's not orgasmic bliss at all. He's dead. He has a horrible gaping wound from crotch to sternum, and has been essentially just wiped from the face of this earth. Then we pan out further, and we see that the clouds themselves take the shape of a poppy, a symbol of remembrance, but also a symbol of war, and a symbol of sort of an aesthetic, if you will. What Gebby does with it is she channels that particular poppy to make it look like, once again, female genitalia, just as the wound of the soldier is rendered to look like female genitalia, in order to create an obvious kind of inversion from our expectations. So this is maybe a little bit weird, kind of surreal stuff. We're left in the position that most literary texts leave readers in at one point or another, the eternal question, what does it all mean? So for Gebby, it seems like this palace, if you will, of sexual joy is now a horrific location of tragic death. The suggestion being that what's going on there is a terrible, terrible alternative to what had been happening there previously with our 3 protagonists. Basically, all we're talking about here is poorly channeled passions. Now, a quote earlier in the text speaks to this. This is the hotel manager. He says, "I'm afraid lots of boys will be dying in mud when they should be effing in bed. War is such a frightful perversion." Now, normally when we use a term like perversion, we're using it in a sexual sense, not in the war sense. But seeing this unfold, and again, the alternative, by the time we read the end of this particular book, it seems almost hard to argue with it. Which one is the more perverse action of the 2? So this is the idea of, essentially, once again, that human beings have this passion, and sometimes they channel it towards creative, loving, or even just sexual ways. And other times, they channel it in the other direction, the unhealthy direction, violence, destruction, and death. We see this manifest in 60s counterculture. One of the more famous slogans to come out of the Vietnam War was "Make love, not war." An expression so famous that it actually featured in the lyrics of both John Lennon and Bob Marley in the same year alone. The idea was pretty simple, that we have a choice. We can make love or we can make war, and we're wasting our time and our energy when we're doing one of the other things. As a result of this, we again have sort of this connection to the war that we see take place in Lost Girls, which is World War I. Vietnam War, World War I, same thing. Human death on a catastrophic scale for reasons that might seem questionable to just about anybody. Now, the last time we see our 3 protagonists, this is what we get. Alice. "I suppose that's what war destroys. All the art and architecture, the fields of flowers, and young people's dreams. All the imagination." This leads us to discussion of, again, that 3rd passion and its connection to sexual passion or sexual imagination. And that is creativity. Now, as I mentioned, each of these stories is familiar. Like, they're drawing on classic elements of Wizard of Oz and Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, except those stories are like pornographic versions of the original stories that we know and are familiar with, thus suggesting that the stories they're telling have some sort of connection to this deeper creative impulse. Alice's story is complicated, but it speaks to the long-term trauma and sexual confusion created by childhood sexual abuse. Dorothy's story, meanwhile, explores the concept of basically recreational sex. Is it possible to just have fun having sex? Or are there consequences? Are there potentials for collateral damage, let's say? Wendy's might be the most nuanced of the 3 of them. Wendy's story presents a complex view of how the threat of sexual violence can repress female sexuality. And as an extension, how there's a sort of double standard in our society where men are much more free to express their sexuality than women are. And our culture seems to be much more attuned to expressions of female sexuality in terms of taking offense. There's also a nice double standard in Lost Girls in general, the idea that Lost Girls places emphasis on female sexual pleasure, where most of our pornography industries, as has been famously documented by a number of theorists, suggest that we tend to really, really overemphasize male pleasure, often at the expense of the female characters. So each of these stories have a sexual energy behind them, theoretically. The idea being that passion is a well source for creativity, that the sexual drive and the creative spirit are importantly commingled. And we can actually see examples of this in our culture, almost intuitively. The number of great artists who have intentionally practiced abstinence in order to enhance their creative potential kind of suggests that we're, again, drawing from one source. Two forms, one passion, when we break it all down. Now, for Moore and Gebbie, this intersection of creativity and passion turned out to be very, very direct. During their work on the Lost Girls project, they formed a relationship and eventually a marriage. They're still married to this day. Moore offers this advice to would-be couples. I'd recommend to anybody working on their relationship that they should try embarking on a 16-year elaborate pornography together. I think they'll find it works wonders. For myself personally, Lost Girls and other texts like it helped to reignite my passion for the field of literary studies, just as the book continues to reignite the passions of the many, many people who have been reading it ever since and giving it that position as, again, a work of literature, something that people seek out as a result of its sheer quality and its resonance. It's confusing, it's offensive, and what it means isn't always clear, but I think it does, once again, boil down to the concept of passion. Passion means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Passion is powerful beyond our reckoning. Passion might actually be what makes us human. We should probably be talking about it. Thank you.